Good. Um, yeah, well, I left some notes on the thing. I don't know if you've looked at that at all, but basically, here's the simple question. And I think it's very simple, but I think people overcomplicate it. But basically, what is culture to you is the question. Or, in other words, how do you experience culture?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Um, my first thoughts on culture are basically I think of the arts. I think of dance and music. Um, but then I also think of some like cultural type things that we do based on where we're from or where our parents are from.
Hmm.
That's kind of what I think of. I know there's a lot more to it than that, but those are always my first impressions when I think of culture.
Yeah.
And then I do think of like subcultures as well, which are very interesting. And
Hmm.
um, yeah, like being from the South,
Hmm.
I occasionally will talk with someone from the Midwest, and I can tell that our cultures are very different, but I can't put into words where I see the difference or what the difference is.
Right.
It's very subtle, but noticeable. Maybe we talk slower in the South. I don't I don't know.
I don't
Uh,
know. Yeah,
I
well,
don't.
obviously there's the accent, but in Florida, that doesn't really exist much unless you're in the north of Florida. Uh,
Yes, unless I'm in denial, I don't think I have a Southern accent. But
no.
I think there's an influence of the South that's here that is noticeably different than somebody who's maybe from Indiana or someplace like that.
I think it's good that you mentioned an accent, though, because people underestimate the influence that language has on culture.
Oh yeah,
They don't even think of language as part of culture.
yeah,
Um, and you could say that it's foundational to culture, um, which I think is a little more accurate. But I think on the day to day basis that we use language to such a degree that we use language, it has a lasting, continual impact on culture. So, for example, the Southern drawl, you could say, it it derives from the slower nature of living life in the South, and the um, way people talk cycles back into that, right, and continues this kind of more relaxed nature you find in the South. Also, um, the language can morph and change through, you know, kind of like invented language, and that comes from how the culture is living at the time. So at the time, your culture might be, find some kind of fascination with a word or with something happening in culture at the time, and start to acquire this change to the language simply based on how the culture is living right now.
yeah.
And people really underestimate how impactful that can be. The way you talk is the way you think.
Mm.
So it really affects the way you think. And this is why I think, to get a little bit political about it, this is why the right wing or conservatives um, fall behind quite often in culture, because we don't have our finger on the pulse of the language necessarily the way the left does.
Mm.
So the left literally, consciously determines how people talk, and this is through their understanding of culture. They understand that if you change the way people talk, you change the way they think, and so they literally are trying to change the way everyone thinks. Um, purposefully. There's a purpose. There's a purpose behind that, and so they're very purposefully putting their finger on the pulse of culture and changing it on a whim. And as we've discussed in previous episodes, culture comes from a voluntary agreement between people with what our culture is about. So as soon as someone arbitrarily inserts themselves into culture, maybe the king or somebody who believes they have authority in society, and they just decide, nope, this is not allowed. You're not allowed to have this culture. You're not allowed to have this heritage or these celebratory events. You're not allowed to use this language. You're not allowed to do that. You have to enjoy my festival. You have to use the language this way. This is actually no longer engaging in culture. It's more like propaganda, right?
Yeah.
So that's what the left is doing now, is they're engaging in propaganda in multiple ways on the culture. So they're like twisting the arm of culture, saying, no, you will do it our way. And so people who kind of are a little more familiar with where culture comes from, we're kind of wise to this, and we say, you know what, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to refuse to use this language. I'm not going to use the language you want us to use. And so we don't see these things as subtle as everybody else does. These things are very overt and purposeful. And so when you resist this king or whoever it is who has authority, and you say, you know what, this is our culture. This is not, just because you're in charge right now does not mean you're in charge of our culture. And so it's kind of a way of resisting false authority. So that's kind of what the right and the left are actually engaged in doing all the time now. And people are not even that conscious of the impact that it has and how important it is. So another thing is holidays and festivals are a deep part of the culture as well, because imagine if one time every year someone was like, yes, this is important enough to move all the business times around and sit and make a special meal or something, or do this and do that the same time every year. We're going to do this. That has a long lasting impact on the way people think. Yeah. So it's and this is, like in the Bible, we're Christians. In the Bible, God establishes festivals for the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And this is God establishing culture, establishing what he sees to be a God-pleasing culture. And so the question is, well, does God have a right to do this? Well, if he's God, then he does. And so when the left is trying to do it, or some political force is trying to do it, it's a really big question, because it's kind of like saying, are these people at the level of God? Should we worship them the way we worship God? And so this is a question that people are placed or are kind of like forced upon. This question is forced upon us. We're placed in a difficult situation sometimes where Caesar, or in Rome, is like forcing on people this law and then saying, you have to consider Caesar as a god, and if you don't consider Caesar as a god, then you'll be punished. You can worship your gods and stuff too. You can have your own festivals, but you have to also worship at our festival. And so when that's done to a society, then people have a decision to make. They have to say, well, does my pagan religion allow me to worship multiple gods? And the answer is generally yes. In a pagan religion, you worship multiple gods. So a lot of people didn't have a problem with Rome dictating festivals and things like that. But Christians get burned at the stake. Why? Because we don't want to worship Caesar as a god. And our God is different from other gods, because our God is an exclusive God. He's a God who says, no, monogamy is how everything works, right? And you have to hold me as your only God.
Yeah.
You can't worship other gods. You can't you can't bow down to a piece of wood and call it
Yeah.
a god. You can't set these other things above God.
Yeah.
So this becomes a Christian kind of a God-pleasing culture where we refuse to bow down to the state, we refuse to bow down to a king, we refuse to bow down to an idol because God tells us we have to do that. We only see the true creator God, as worthy to be worshiped. So all this stuff is very impactful with our culture. And in Protestantism, for example, we don't even want to see like a statue of Mary or something because, and this is also goes into our culture as Protestants versus Catholics. Nothing against Catholics, but Protestants have a different view, which is that we're a little more leery of the idea of veneration of something besides God.
Yeah.
And so we want to guard our hearts against some kind of idolatry that might sneak into our lives. And so a lot of Protestants, I don't have as much of a problem with statues personally, because I could see a statue of Zeus or whatever and not bow down to it. But I see it as a piece of art, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of Protestants, they grew up in a church where these items were kind of like revered to such a degree that they felt it was taking them away from God.
Yeah.
And so they would, resist that kind of thing. And that was kind of called being an iconoclast, which is an image breaker. You broke the images that at one point you revered, and now you no longer do. So so that's another big impact that these things can have on culture. And Protestantism, as a result, became very free of a lot of embellishments. You look at like the garb of a Puritan, as opposed to someone from the same period that lived in the Renaissance in Europe who was maybe a Catholic. And the garb of a Puritan is very plain. It's black and white. I mean, it's like nothing interesting happening there. Of course, to people today, we'd be like, "Oh, that's really fancy," but to someone back in the Renaissance day, that was very boring and bland.
Yeah.
So,
well, even just thinking of non-denominational churches that I've been in, there's like almost no ornamentation at all.
Yep.
Sometimes not even a cross, like just nothing visual.
Right.
At all, which is sort of weird. But
yeah, it is weird. I mean, it's noticeable, especially if you're an artist and you're always looking for beautiful things around you. It's very noticeable. I think if you're just a typical kind of Protestant going to church every week and you're not an artistic thinker, you don't really notice it. You think it's just normal. It becomes the day to day, and I wonder if this is where office buildings came from. It's like this is the day to day, so that we're going to work in an office building like this too. I don't know, but for me, it's very bland and very noticeable.
Yeah.
It almost feels like an idol of itself, in my view. It's like, we have to have as much of nothing as possible, and this becomes our new idol.
Yeah, our new idol is our lack of idols.
Yes.
We're staunchly holding fast to our lack of idols.
Yes, it's like a virtue signal almost.
Well, I think too, a person is more likely to idolize themselves or their spouse or their jobs than they are to idolize a statue.
Good point.
Statues are enjoyable to look at, and a lot of religious art and statues may have the added benefit of drawing your heart to God and kind of lifting your eyes up and becoming more heavenly minded.
Mm-hmm.
But then feeling afraid, like, oh, if I see a statue, I might worship it,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
kind of unhelpful. Yeah.
It's a little paranoid, I think.
Yeah.
At least it can become very paranoid. You're very concerned that these things are just going to break down at any moment, and you're just going to start worshiping something you shouldn't. You hear a bird go by and you're like, "That's a beautiful bird." Oh no, don't worship it. It's this. I'm scared. And that's how I think people treat like Jonathan Rumi on The Chosen. They're like, "Oh my goodness, he's a good actor in a faith-based film. I'm going to start worshiping him at any moment." It's very strange. I don't understand it. And a lot of this, I think, for me and you, this is very obvious to us because we're artists. So we're around things that are beautiful. We want to be part of creating things that are beautiful and compelling artistically, aesthetically pleasing. And we would never think of worshiping them just because they're aesthetically pleasing. Why? Because we just made it 5 minutes ago or something. Like it's
Yeah.
not, and we can destroy it at any moment. So it's
Yeah.
like that's not. And also, we've worked on films before where this was like a meaningless project. You know what I mean? Like there was nothing like deeply compelling about it, but we're still working on trying to make it beautiful, to look nice. To be narratively compelling.
Yeah.
And so these kinds of moments demystify the arts. And so when people are kind of overly interested in arts, it's kind of like someone who's a new Christian and they just learned about the devil or something, and they're just like obsessed with evil or something, like
Oh,
or
yeah.
spirituality, and
Yeah.
they're
Like
just
like spiritual warfare. And then they're
yes,
seeing like, oh, that's a sign of witchcraft or something. And they're seeing that
right,
everywhere. Yeah.
Halloween or whatever, like they're scared of it.
Yeah.
And so we can kind of get these obsessions that are not healthy, and because we've kind of like placed things in bad priorities, you know. It's kind of like the Bible, when the Bible often says these comparisons, especially this is true in the Gospels with Christ and with some other people, is Christ is like, you're going to have to hate other people compared to how you feel about me. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, and so we're like, Jesus is telling us to hate people. That's just, no, you don't understand. Like, he's asking you to love people as yourself, but he's also asking you to love God so much more than you love others that it's almost like you hate others in comparison to God.
Yeah.
So these are relativistic statements.
I've got a good obsession I can recommend to you.
Yeah,
God.
there you go.
Let
And
yourself
that was my point.
be obsessed with God.
That's my point. Is that speaking relativistically, we should not even be interested in spiritism or demons or things of this nature in comparison to our obsession with the Holy Spirit and with Jesus and with God the Father. So
Yeah.
his ways have to be so much more compelling to us than what the devil's trying to do, um, and even what our guardian angel or whatever is trying to do. And this is, another thing that Protestants have in contention with some Catholics, is that it goes into this idea of venerating bodies and spirits and beings and people that are not God. Um, and so things get knocked out of whack as it comes to your priorities, and how easy that can happen in the mind of a Protestant. It can be very easy to happen. And so as an artist, right, we're just talking about how as an artist these things are not something worthy of worship. And this is why I extend some patience to Orthodox and Catholics, because, well, don't you think that as an artist it's easy for you because of your proximity to it? So it's easier for me to not worship an idol. Well, don't you think it's easier for them also to not worship it? because of the proximity that they have to it. So because they spend time in these places and they spend time thinking about these things, and they spend time like acquainted with things in this way, looking at things in this manner, they're actually less capable of falling into that because they are constantly reminding themselves of the difference between the two. And just like how with me is with art, I'm constantly reminded of how this is just art and I can make it or destroy it at any moment. And maybe a piece of iconography could also be destroyed at any moment. And so they aren't, their heart is not drawn to it to the degree that it's drawn to God.
Yeah.
And like one statement I find really compelling in the Gospels about this is how Jesus literally looked at Mary, his mother, the people whom many venerate and pray to, the person that many venerate and pray to. He literally says, "She is not my mother. The people in my kingdom, the people who worship God, are my mother and my brothers." So again, this is a comparative statement. This is a relativistic statement. This is not to say whatsoever that Jesus didn't love his mother. It was to say that in comparison to the kingdom of God and doing the work of the kingdom, this is more important than your immediate family.
Yeah.
Right? So the church's family has to be more important to you than your family at home. It's your true family, right? In comparison. So this is, again, it's a statement of comparison, a statement of relativistic kind of like focus. You're focused more on God's kingdom than you are when you go home and you spend time with your family. And that is not something that we do today, is it? Like, we don't emphasize going to church more than emphasize seeing our family or going to work or things like this. We have a work obsessed society today, which if you went to maybe to South America, your family would be more prominent to you, or even many places in Europe or Africa. There's more of like a focus on the extended family, even not even just your immediate nuclear family.
Yeah.
Like it's true in America is mostly your nuclear family.
Yeah.
So this kind of emphasis is very interesting. And we have this. Not only can it be dangerous in these other parts of the world where they don't emphasize the church because they're emphasizing family. In America, it's even worse. We don't even emphasize our family or the church compared to our job. So that's kind of ridiculous. But I think we're supposed to be going to church thinking, this is my true family, and that's not easy to do in today's society. But I find these comparisons interesting, and I think culture, because of our lack of involvement on the pulse of culture, like I was saying about language, people have their finger on the pulse of culture through language and through these other things like festivals and holidays. Since we don't have our finger on the pulse of culture a lot in conservatism, we just become kind of slaves to what's happening around us. We don't participate in these conversations. We don't participate in culture creation. We don't even realize what culture is and how it affects us on a day-to-day basis. Like, we don't realize, for example, like Pride Month is like a major intrusion on the culture, and that just the fact that it exists is a purposeful it's purposefully affecting the culture in our society to such a degree that every year we think about it. And I mean, do we have like Christianity month or something? No, we don't. We even in Christmas, it's like, well, whatever. It's just Christmas. The rest of it's just like time to eat sweets and stuff and get the presents ready. Like that's not really about Christianity. So it's close. It's a close, probably the closest thing to it I can think of. But and some parts of the faith have like Catholics do a good job with festivals in many ways. They have like Lenten. Is that like a week long period there?
I think so. I'm not
And
sure.
Jews used to have, of course, many are still observing Jews, and they have, I think it's 4 different festivals throughout the year that are week long festivals. I could be wrong
Yeah,
about that. Yeah.
there are about four that come to mind. Yeah, and then there are like the feast days of
Mm-hmm.
different saints and things,
Yeah.
which is kind of
Good
cool.
stuff. So I'm convinced that Protestants need to follow Catholics with a lot of that because I think Catholics have been faithful to emphasize the importance of culture a lot more than Protestants. And just the fact that they used Latin, right, was an inner sanctum of culture within Catholicism.
Mm.
And imagine if Protestants were like, oh no, we're only going to speak Aramaic to each other or something. Like everybody else, they don't even know what we're talking about. That would certainly create levels of involvement in the culture to where there are many insiders, many people with their finger on the pulse of these things
Yeah.
that the people on the outside just can't get involved in. And so it really kind of insulates and creates this insider influence that pushes a lot of people out, and that creates kind of like a wall of protection around the culture.
Mm.
I find that to be powerful.
Yeah.
So if the more we have these kinds of things, the better for our culture. The less the culture is vulnerable to attack, and
Mm.
we can kind of like keep a richness of culture. The more we protect these kind of institutions. But I think in Western culture, generally, our culture is based upon, like what you said, the arts, and what I would say is storytelling.
Yeah.
The thing I think is the most impactful in Western culture is storytelling,
Yeah.
and it's also creates a vibrant atmosphere to discuss and evolve culture through stories. So
Yeah.
film, of course, is probably the most popular way to do this, but this can start with a book, this can start with a comic book, this can start with a song, this can start with a lot of things, a game. It can start with just some kind of narrative, and that can be written into a script and made into a film, and bam, now you have like Lucasfilm and Star Wars
Yeah.
and a franchise, and you have people literally, I think they literally have an official religion now, which is like a
Oh.
Star Wars religion.
Oh wow.
I don't know if people still follow that, but I think it was maybe 10 years ago I heard about it, and it
Well, it
was
makes sense
yeah.
because um they give Luke Skywalker some spiritual advice in the beginning, like one of the first, I guess the first movie. I don't remember what the advice was, but they're telling him to calm down, to breathe deep, to focus on his
Mm-hmm.
energy. That makes sense that someone would be like, "Hey, let's just follow this advice and make a religion."
Yeah, and I mean the whole idea to me is about the force. What is the force?
Right.
And so the force could be like almost anything you could imagine, really, but except the idea is that it's supposed to mimic the basic structure of the basic idea of how the force is used in the movies. So if it can mimic that and not contradict it in some way, then so there's these canon statements that people like Yoda speak about the Force,
Yeah.
which I think mostly is stated in the second movie, Empire Strikes Back, where he talks about the Force binds us and all of this stuff binds all of the universe. Um, and by the prequels, then it becomes more of a sciencey thing. But I still find it very interesting that something like this can happen,
Yeah.
and it's so impactful that there's people who literally want to worship in a religion. Um, One movie that I'm kind of obsessed with a little bit right now is Metropolis,
Yeah.
and which is because it became public domain.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm always looking for opportunities to get involved in culture and make something that's lasting and vibrant and meaningful.
Yeah.
And so I'm taking it upon myself to study that movie and that book that I didn't even realize it was a book.
Mm.
And so Metropolis is like an early Star Wars. A lot of people don't know this, but Fritz Lang and his wife, who I forget her name, um, she wrote the book that goes along with the movie that Fritz Lang made. And they literally were kind of like
Wow.
making a franchise of
Yeah.
like a film franchise at the time. So they were doing like a multimedia kind of push with this story. And I found that really fascinating because I didn't realize they were doing that early, like in
Yeah.
1927, that they were doing that kind of thing that early, but they were. So I just mostly thought of Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz. That's mostly what I thought of back in the day. And Wizard of Oz came from
Mm.
a book, but it wasn't like planned along with the movie. Like the book was there first, and then the movie
Yeah.
later, which is a very typical kind of way these things work. But one thing people just also don't realize about this whole thing is that um, the way language is so impactful, the way holy days and holidays are so impactful, it's for the same reason that films became so impactful because people were having discussions, right? So these events, these things, uh, these essential parts of culture were moments when people could sit down and talk about the meaning behind them. And so, in many ways, there's been discussions lately about conservative culture. There's an actor named Matthew Marsden who's trying to make his own studio on Twitter. He's trying to get people to subscribe to his channel because he wants to make a studio kind of similarly to the Daily Wire or something like this.
Yeah.
And another thing that's happening with conservative culture is in the comic book realm, Comicsgate. There's been a continual, like maybe 2 weeks long debate happening. I don't want to call it like a bickering argument kind of thing. I think of it more like a debate. And so these things don't bother me at all. But it's a debate between one artist and another. And the one artist is talking about the importance of art, and the other is talking about the importance of business.
Mm.
And so this is the age old kind of debate in the art world between what's more important. Is it do you need to be a crossover artist so you can survive kind of like financially, or should you remain authentic to yourself as an artist, no matter how much money you're leaving on the table? And so there's this is just an age old debate in the arts. And one thing that they forget is that, and I think this is the point that the artist in the debate is making. And so I kind of agree with him because of this. But what he's basically saying is that you need to have the criticism aspect of art in there. Like you have to have criticism of art. And criticism is because I think he understands this properly, which is that criticism really is part of the art. It's not enough to make a piece of art and then leave it in your closet or something and be like, that's art. I made art. I put it in my closet. Nobody can see it, but it's art. And so one of the essential questions that was made and at some point in art history, I don't remember when, but it was kind of like, does a tree fall if nobody hears it fall in the woods kind of thing?
Mm.
Like an existential question, right? It's like, if nobody knows you exist, do you really exist? And so that question has been raised through the centuries about art. Like if art is never brought to the public and criticized properly, then is it really ever art?
Mm.
And so this is why when I create my definition of culture, I always include the discussion, the debate, the robust, um, kind of like, discussion about what this art means. And if we don't have that robust discussion about art, then it's not culture. So it's not that it's not art. I won't go so far as to say that's not art in your closet that nobody can see. But what I
Mm.
will say is that that art is not influencing the culture at all. So the culture is created when we have a discussion about that art. And that's how it impacts people, changes society, and creates culture.
Yeah.
So without criticism in Hollywood, without fair criticism, without actual honest debate about what how good films are or how bad they are, without that honest debate, you're not actually creating culture. And this is why what we talk about on Media Moses often is the subversion of Hollywood, because there's the two aspects of culture, which is the creation of impactful art and things like this that are forms of communication, right? That artists generally make.
Yeah.
And then there's the debate about that art. So that's the second part. And if those two things aren't happening, then you don't, that's not engaging in culture. And
Yeah.
if they're not happening voluntarily, then it's also not culture. So that has to happen voluntarily and openly, like a free expression. So when someone is making a piece of art, but it's not a free expression, then it's not art. And when someone is criticizing something, but they're not doing it honestly, they're doing it because they're being paid to do it, and paid to say certain things, that's also not criticism. So it's actually not part of making culture either.
Mm.
And so that's how Hollywood is being destroyed through both means. Um, Propaganda is being made instead of art, and access media is being paid to um, criticize art in a dishonest way. And so both sides are not authentic or voluntary, and therefore both are not culture.
Mm.
And so these things have to happen very authentically. And so back to the comics debate, the artist is saying, listen, I want to be able to criticize your comics. And if I can't do that, then what are we doing here? And so and he's right, because this is not actually culture building. it's weak, you know. And you have to, if you're an artist, you learn pretty quickly that if you're not able to listen to criticism, your art is going to become really weak. And I'm not talking about its impact on people necessarily, but it's um, it's made you a weak artist. So you're not able to really create better art. And so when the culture realizes that your art is not vital, it becomes irrelevant to that culture. So that's the problem, is that, you know, your art might have been relevant. Like, let's say you came from a different culture and you keep making art that's like your old culture, but the new culture that you're in is not interested in that, so it doesn't become impactful in that new culture, you see.
Mm.
Um, so you're not really engaging in culture then. You're an artist, and you are maybe engaging in your own life with the old culture you came from, but you're not really engaging in the culture that you exist in now, which I think artists generally want to do that, and if they don't, then they probably should, because that's kind of what art is for. It's for engaging with other people. So
Yeah.
it doesn't have to become, you know, supremely influential in some way, but I think you should at least try to engage with the culture.
Yeah.
So this is where conservatives are now. We're not really engaging in the culture, and
Mm.
neither are people in Hollywood. So you have a lot of inauthentic stuff being made right now.
Hmm. I mean, I think for me, for a while there, I was just watching YouTubers.
Yes, that's where a lot of authenticity is right now. It's on
Yeah,
places like YouTube.
it
Yeah,
was
I agree with
very
that.
authentic.
Yep.
And um, I didn't need anyone to be well spoken or anything. In fact, the more produced the shows got, the less interested I was.
Yeah.
So, I mean, now I hardly watch TV at all.
Yeah, me too.
But
I
before,
like films and YouTube.
yes, but before now, I watched namely vlogs and homeschool videos.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
We
I
were
mean,
learning to homeschool them.
I'm sure there's plenty of good shows out right now. Um, I just sort of lost interest.
Yeah.
Um, I remember watching Breaking Bad with you. That was a great show.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure there's been plenty of other good shows since then, but
Game of Thrones. We liked Game of Thrones to some degree.
yeah, Game of Thrones was fun, but it just seemed like, I don't know. It just seemed like it was sort of hard to get into shows after that.
Yeah.
Um,
And then The Chosen happened.
yeah, that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, that's
That
certainly
was
impacting
great.
culture, isn't it?
Yeah, that to me is really engaging in the culture.
Yeah, it's wonderful how many people have seen it. Um, People who are maybe on the fringes of Christianity are kind of like checking it out
Mm-hmm.
and being like, "Oh, I knew it. I knew
Yeah.
Jesus was nice.
Right, right.
I knew he
He's
was a
just a
good
normal
guy."
person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was just a regular guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really doing some good things, drawing people in that maybe didn't feel welcomed in Christian culture before.
Right. And then there's all these very traditional-ish sort of Christians who are like, this is bad.
Yeah, there is an interesting backlash. You know a lot more about it than I do, but but some people are just unaware of how enjoyable Jesus is.
Yeah, for sure.
That's all I that's all I can say, is that I think some people are just hesitant
Yeah.
to enjoy thoughts of him and images of him, and um, or maybe there's some fear there that
Mm-hmm.
he'll be portrayed incorrectly, or like you said earlier, the actor will be idolized.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I don't know. I want to be empathetic to what people are feeling, but yeah, Jesus is nice and fun.
Yeah, he's not just a dude, but maybe when you're looking at him, he might seem just like a dude to you at first,
Yeah.
and then you meet him. I what I describe, like, this is one of the ways, you know, I describe Christianity and why people become saved, and I describe meeting Jesus as meeting that kind of person that changes you just by meeting them.
Mm.
Um, he's just that certain kind of person that impacts you to such a degree where it changes you as a person. And
Mm.
so, not being changed by him is kind of like a way of saying I didn't really meet him, right? Like, even though I was here, I talked to him, but I didn't really connect.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't get it. And so, or you just weren't paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
But like, he's one of those people that you cannot, in my view, if you really meet him, you are changed eternally by him.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's just kind of how I look at it. But yeah, I guess I wanted to go back to some of the things we were talking about before with it. We talked about what is culture to you, and we talked about like some of the essential, like, foundational elements of culture, and also about Western culture and how it's influenced a lot by story, and how you can do that through film and these franchises and things like this.
Yeah.
Um, I guess this week there's some news, um, and
Mm.
some of these things could go into what we're saying. But there's the situation with Gina Carano, who is now suing Disney
Wow.
over cancel culture,
Yeah. Wow.
being canceled by the company. And of course, I'm very pro Gina, because I think that people should have a right to speak their mind, even if they're wrong.
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
all of us are wrong about lots of things. So holding people to an impossible standard is kind of ridiculous. And especially if you're talking about their social media account,
Mm.
people say dumb things on social media all the time. And to
Yeah.
kick them off of their job for that is just like enormously stupid in so many ways. Um, and as a Christian myself, I think that there are elements in Christianity that have a cancel culture of a sort, but to equate the two of them as cancel culture is ridiculous.
Mm.
Because Christianity is probably the only faith that believes in complete redemption of a human being. That you can be an evil person, even a killer or whatever, and if you truly believe in Christ for your salvation, because you believe He's God and He died for your sin, then I'm sorry, but I consider that person a brother, and you can't disown your brother, really. Like, you can say
Mm.
bad things to them and say you don't want to be their brother anymore, but you're still their brother. you
Yeah.
can't you can't just undo that. So that's why the family of God is such an important thing to recognize. When you're in His family, you're in His family. You can't be kicked out. So sorry,
Right.
but the Pope cannot kick you out of heaven. I'm sorry, you can't do that. So
No, I mean, Jesus says no one can snatch you from my hands.
yes, exactly. So I think that verse has been misinterpreted. But yeah, I think Gina Carano is right to sue them, and I think she will win. Um, and hopefully this could be the beginning of a tide that turns away from the entire idea of cancel culture. Um, and but this will probably be one of many things that have to happen to end this kind of unredemptive religious experience of hatred, which is what cancel culture really is, just hating people through social media. So
Yeah.
we need to learn to kind of like disregard these people, but also to minimize them and kick them off of these platforms. So it's kind of like, well, if you do something wrong in real life, you get a punishment for it. You might get sent to prison. Well, if you do something wrong in the social media realm, like continually canceling people, maybe you're going to get kicked off of these platforms permanently. So so there's that's happening, and Elon Musk is supposedly helping her through the lawsuit, but also he's potentially working with Nelson Peltz, who's the activist investor, who's trying to reform Disney. And there was a recent video of Elon Musk on the red carpet of a movie called Lolo, in which Elon stated that he was with friends and looking for companies to buy. And then he gave a little wink to the camera.
Wow.
And only maybe 2 weeks before that, he was cursing out Bob Iger from Disney.
Oh, wow.
And saying, because Disney was saying that they were going to remove advertising from Twitter and for political reasons. And so Elon Musk cursed him out in public and on camera. And so it looks like Elon is in the business of maybe buying out Disney.
Wow.
Or at least it's going to be putting pressure on Bob Iger and Disney to reform. So I think there's a good chance of that, especially not necessarily buying Disney, but putting pressure on Bob Iger to reform or get out of the position of being CEO, and maybe pressuring the board to discipline Bob Iger in some way. But yeah, so that's happening because, as we know, Disney is like the most influential media and entertainment company in the world. So these things have an impact on the wider culture. Any thoughts on that?
Man, it would be cool to see Disney like restored or something.
Yeah.
That would be really cool.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I think, don't understand what Disney was from the beginning and what it's supposed to be, which is kind of a container for our modern myths.
Yeah.
And this container was generally put in some good animation for kids. And the fact that it's for kids makes it very much like a fairy tale and very much like a childish, innocent story that teaches values, the values of the culture.
Yeah.
And fairy tales are notorious for probably being the most, I guess, influential package of culture carrying for kids that there's been for hundreds of years. I mean, the fairy tales are one of the best ways to do this.
Yeah.
So that's what Disney started out being, and now they are talking about like adult matters to kids. They're talking about things that kids shouldn't be listening to or hearing about or engaging with. And so even adults find a lot of these things kind of like they get a shudder when they think about what Disney's talking about these days. And like, why is this happening? And
Yeah.
so this is just a different culture that's kind of like infusing itself and forcing itself upon our culture. Um, and so with that bit of, again, with that bit of force being placed upon us and upon our children, it's really propaganda, right? So it's not really culture. It's fake, you know.
Yeah. It definitely felt like the 90s version of Disney, which is the one I'm most familiar with.
Yeah.
Was very like creative and the sky's the limit.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just about movies and shows, it was about experiences,
Mm-hmm.
um, and atmosphere, and just a just like a wonderful kind of innocent feeling of anything's possible.
Yeah.
um, and then over the years it felt like it became more commercial. Maybe it's because I grew up and I saw it. I mean, I guess it was always commercial, but
Yeah.
um, I don't know. It just seems like that perspective when I initially experienced Disney, it just feels like that's not their priority anymore at all.
Right. Yeah. I think one mistake that these companies often make is they just follow their biggest fan base as they grow up.
Hmm.
And so, like the '90s, for example, was the first real time when the Disney princess like was showing a little bit of skin and had full like female woman bodies
Hmm.
instead of like stuff for kids. Because Snow White was a woman, but she almost looked like a kid in a dress. I mean, she
Okay.
didn't really look like a full grown woman necessarily.
Yeah.
Um, she was very well clothed, and a lot of the stories from the even into the '60s and '70s, they didn't really have these kind of like more mature, um, kind of like the Little Mermaid and
Mm. Oh, okay. Yeah.
the um, the Beauty and the Beast. Um,
Yeah.
it's true that the Beauty and the Beast was not like showing as much skin as the Little Mermaid, but um, it was a little more adult.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so what they were doing was following their fan base up as they grew up,
Mm.
um, and they became a follower of a demographic as opposed to just doing what they always did, which is telling fairy tales to kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So instead of creating more and more fans, they started following their smaller fan base as they grew up.
Mm.
And then
Yeah.
they started, with live action narrative stuff in the '90s as well. And some of these stories that Disney owned were not really for kids. Like they were more like for young adults, really.
Yeah.
But they would often advertise them like they were for kids.
Mm.
So that
Yeah.
was to me a big mistake too, because that was kind of a form of not fraud, but kind of like bad marketing.
Mm.
And I'm always very sensitive to that as an artist because bad marketing can destroy your art because you get bad reviews from that. And then that means the discussion about your art is corrupted in some way.
Mm.
We have a lot
Yeah.
of people who came through the theater doors to see a film of this genre. They saw something else, and so everything they say now from here on out is from a place of disappointment,
Mm.
and that should never have happened if there was good, you know, but it did because of the marketing. So the marketing is very important with any artistic work. Um, and in some ways, I do consider it a form of fraud when someone is marketing your film as something that it's not. I think that's, you know, to me as an artist, it's like a more personal act that should not be done. It's like a form of fraud to me as an artist. Obviously, you know, as a consumer, they're kind of more used to this, and some of them would disagree and say, well, this is, you know, it wasn't necessarily purposefully meant for this group, but it was just bad, maybe a little bit badly done. You know, they're a little more kind of forgiving in that way, but then they'll also give it a bad review as a result. So it's like, well, actually, I see that many people are not that forgiving as they actually look at the work. But I guess my point is that Disney started engaging in a lot of this kind of stuff, and no longer were they doing just authentic kid stuff anymore. And this just continued to worsen and worsen every decade. And now it's obviously, you know, you have the current reign at Disney, which is more engaged in buying other people's stuff than they are in making their own stuff.
Yeah.
And that's obviously going to be a big mistake, because it's like a form of brain drain, right? Like all of your brainiacs are really owned by somebody else, and you don't actually know how to work with them, and you don't really know how to communicate and compete and collaborate with them. So you're actually losing your own ability to tell good stories. You're leaving it to somebody else all the time.
Yeah.
Big mistake.
And it could be that the fairy tale is not being valued.
Oh, so true.
And why would it? Like, certain perspectives might look at a fairy tale and just think it's irrelevant to our culture, because they're very old. Obviously, we don't have a lot of new fairy tales. Not saying we can't have new fairy tales, but there's something about a fairy tale that needs to be sort of removed from the modern age.
So true.
Where the modern conveniences just, they would prevent the story from happening.
Yeah, it takes you out of the story. Yeah.
And we need to, magic needs to be featured as an option. Not an
Absolutely.
option, but like as a possibility, you know, like something magical could happen at any moment. And then the result is always love. And I find that very exciting. Like I'm very into the symbols of Disney. I love the castle. I love the, you know, dreams and wishes and the prince and the princess. I'm just gonna go for it, you know, and magic and all of that. Like
these are all great symbols.
Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. Like there's so much there that, in my opinion, you know where I'm coming from, is bride and bridegroom, is, you know, Christ and his church.
Totally.
And I think in the very core of our being, we are looking for that, and we're conscious of that. And that's why we love romantic movies. And that's why I think that's also why we like action movies, because we like the hero, the lone wolf who saves the day.
Yep.
And this, of course, to me, is our longing for Christ-like figure, who is actually Christ, to come and save our day.
The good shepherd. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I love that, the potential there, and I love the history there. And then even like the World of Tomorrow and Epcot and all of those things that they did were so inspirational, hopeful, and full of belief in the future. Like the whole thing was just belief and positivity. Like like we can create this technology and we can live this way, live this better life. And then Spaceship Earth, one of my favorite rides, is,
Yeah.
in the ball in Epcot. It just goes through history, all the way up until like, space and this hope that we'll live in space one day. And there's just always this perspective of going up.
Yeah.
Going up to someplace that's better, that's in your dreams, that's in another realm, that's in another dimension, where there's a kingdom, and you're gonna be okay. You're gonna be happily ever after.
Right. Right.
And people love to mock that.
Oh, I don't think so.
Well, like people who are cynical, that they're like, oh, I thought it was going to be happily ever after, or and then they lived happily ever after, and then they roll their eyes, or it's like a thing that people don't believe
Yeah,
is
but
real.
those are not Disney things. Like I think anytime that coincides with Disney, I think there's less cynicism about it. I think there really is a lot of belief and hope in the magic of Disney, especially for people who aren't religious, right? Because this is like, I'm just going to say it, okay? And a lot of people who are maybe Catholics or more traditional aren't going to see it right away, and they probably already know what I'm going to say. But all of these things you mentioned that are symbols that Disney has kind of like co-opted, right? This is really an iconography in a church.
Yeah.
So all of these symbols are co-opted church iconography.
Yeah.
Like a form of like the kingdom with Christendom it's probably the highest period of church of Christendom castle building that castle in Germany that it was based upon. And then all these other symbols you mentioned, including the more modern one, which is the planet Earth one, which has more to do with evolution and our modern understanding of science. It's more of a sciencey thing. Epcot is a sciencey thing, right? And Tomorrow, the land of tomorrow, whatever it was, Tomorrowland is more of like science fiction, right? There's science fiction and then there's science. And so Epcot is like earth science and things like this, biology, evolutionary theory. And this is another church also. So all of these places are churches that are there to co-opt belief in your old culture. So your old culture is where you came from. Maybe you're an immigrant from Africa, or maybe you're an immigrant from Bavaria or from South America. You come to bring your culture. You bring your culture with you, right? But then you come to America and you get to experience Disneyland or Disney World, in which your own church is being co-opted by Disney. So they want to provide a substitute for you of their faith, the Disney faith, which is the Magic Kingdom, in which you make a wish, right? You come to America and you make a wish, and everything's going to be all right, and you're going to get to be a princess or a prince in America now. You don't have to believe in your old faith or your own ethnicity any longer, or your own cultural heritage. That can kind of go away. And now you have something like Disney to replace that culture. And you don't need a god. There's no god that's necessary. You become like the goddess, which is the princess, right? You become the goddess of your own wishes, and you make a wish, and this becomes your new religion, which is yourself. Feminism and goddess worship. And so this is kind of like the modern American religion, and it's there to co-opt all the old traditional faiths. And so people, like, if you're Greek Orthodox or you're Roman Catholic, like I said, you probably know exactly what I'm saying, because they're very familiar with this iconography, right? This is a part of their church. Every week they go to church, they see the iconography, they know what it is, they know what it symbolizes. And they go to Disney and they think, oh, well, this is the same kind of iconography. But this is innocent and pure and doesn't really have to matter much and mean much. It's just for fun and entertainment, right? No, not really. Like, if you really are a true Christian, you know that mankind worships things. Like, we just kind of start worshiping things. If they're big enough and powerful enough and strong enough in our lives, your job, your car, your sports team, all these things you start to put so much energy and weight into. These are things that you have to be careful of when you're a Christian. And like we were talking about with iconoclasm and Protestants versus iconography.
Yeah.
Like, there's many different parts of the faith where we are more leery of some forms of media, and some of us are leery of other forms of media, and some of us are more leery of money and power, and some of us are more leery of something else. But we try to be wise to these kinds of things and see them almost as trickery, like ways of taking us away from God. And so, I think many Catholics and Orthodox, they go to Disney and they think this is just demonic. Like, this is not of God.
Wow.
My family's going to enjoy it, and then maybe I'll have a moment to talk to them about, like, not turning this into some form of idol worship. But many people were kind of wise to Disney pretty early on and said no more Disney, and they protested and they made a hubbub about things because they saw kind of in the symbology of Disney that things were not all magic, they were not all good, and that kids were not always safe in these environments either. So some of us have been a little wise to it earlier on, and some of us, now that we see the ideology changing and we see all these things were actually not good, now we get to see the fruit of it, right? The tree grows up, and then it finally bears fruit, and you're like, oh, this was not a good tree. It was really actually trying to either subvert or co-opt or replace God in some way. And so, I try to be a little bit more merciful than that. I try not to think of it like, oh, this was always their plan, or something like this. I just think of it like it's become something bad. And so we do have to be aware of that, of what it is now. And so, we should protect our children from that. I think that's important to do. And just like how we have to look at social media now, like, well, this has become something bad. It was something good before, I think, but now it's become something that's bad. And so how do we navigate that so that it's not a harmful thing? One of these things, obviously, as we've talked about before, is human trafficking. So a lot of parents are not wise to this yet, but giving their 10-year-old daughter like a phone is a really bad idea. And now we're starting to learn why that is, but a lot of people haven't caught on to this yet. But social media and the internet has become like Disney, right? It's become something that's been co-opted by some other force, and it's becoming something bad now. Yeah. And children are not safe in that environment.
Yeah.
And so these are things we're learning a lot. And now we're learning we have to like participate in the culture again to such a degree where so many of these things need to be reformed and changed back into something that's good and enriching and beautifying and intellectually satisfying, yes, but also just kind of innocent for children.
Yeah.
Where they can learn, like you were saying about fairy tales, right? The beauty of fairy tales. Yeah. There's love in the end, right? Now, so many people are going to listen to what I'm saying and say, yes, but how is this possible? How can we engage in culture? It's too difficult. Hollywood has billions and billions of dollars. That's the only reason they can make these great shows. And it's like, well, yes and no. Hollywood has also made filmmaking very expensive because of the unions and all these things. And they don't always utilize techniques and technologies that make it cheaper to make films. But also, Hollywood has an aesthetic, and they have ways of making money. And generally, those ways cost a lot of money to make a lot of money. That's generally what they do. But we don't have to do that. We can use models like they used when the French New Wave happened. So the French New Wave, they kept down costs by using newer technology. They separated the sound recording from the video recording from the celluloid, and they kept it black and white. They'd used cheap stock. They traveled with their actors, so they didn't have to be on a set, right? They could be on location. They barely used lights because they were always shooting outdoors with the sun. These are all little things that they did in the French New Wave. But here's what's most important about the French New Wave. They came from criticism. They criticized films at the time that were not speaking to them in their society about what was valuable and important to them. So this is the same thing we're dealing with now. We're dealing with a Hollywood that says things that we don't care about. They tell stories we're not interested in. And they do it too expensively. They don't care about theatrical. They do a lot of things that are irrelevant to us, right? They want you to be on your couch and Netflix and chill. And frankly, I think that's kind of boring. Like I would rather, literally, I'd literally rather watch a YouTube video on my phone, or I'd rather go to a theater. Like, I'd rather do either one of those things rather than Netflix and chill. And because these things speak to me more. So, and with theatrical, you can still have a conversation with somebody. Like, you can still be in a community. But back to the French New Wave, I think that most importantly, like I said, people need to start telling stories again, like the guys from the French New Wave did, which was about their lives. Stuff about culture now. And there's only a few people in the world doing this right now. Like the Daily Wire did that movie, Lady Ballers. Like that movie was so modern that it was uncomfortable. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's going to get people to watch it, and that's going to actually affect the culture. So I'm not saying it was a great film or even a good film, but the subject matter that they were approaching was impactful because it's modern. It's about what's going on in society now. So, like, and then obviously documentaries do this as well, but I think that we need more like comedies, horror films, action films. Like in the 80s, I remember there being a lot of crime, right? And so what happened because there was crime? Well, they made Dirty Harry films. And Dirty Harry films were like about the regular schmo who, and Death Wish, for example, is an example of this. Death Wish was another series like the Dirty Harry series of films that was about a regular schmo who gets attacked by criminals on the street, and he just starts taking revenge on these people. And so, if you're dealing with crime in your society, make some Dirty Harry films. Like, these films will sell because they're relevant to society now. And you can also make some social commentary there and be like, well, why is there so much crime? Let's talk about it. So it allows people to engage in conversation about what's happening in society now. And the reason that Hollywood apparently doesn't want to do this is because they don't want to engage in culture. They want to force the culture through propaganda to talk about the things they want to talk about, which is all this anti-children stuff. So instead of that, I think we need to make stuff that is relevant to us. Start small, do cheap stuff, learn about story, learn about how story is constructed, and, maybe read a book about the French New Wave and see how they did it. But, I mean,
maybe
it is not impossible to do this at all.
Yeah.
But you do have to get together with some people, have some discussions, and maybe form a small crew of people who can help you make stuff.
Yeah.
So this is not hard. I mean, with social media, you can meet people across the world and get stuff done.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, they just aren't plugged into this. They don't think that they can do it. They think that they can't accomplish it by themselves. And that's true. They probably can't accomplish it themselves, but that's why they have to reach out and connect.
Yeah.
So that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, so a conservative new wave film movement.
Yep. Conwave.
I like it.
That's what I call it, at least. But I'm not in charge of that. But yeah, we need to have more and more discussions, and also make some stuff ourselves. Like I'm working on some stuff myself, as you know.
Yeah.
Working on scripts. I wrote 3 kids books recently.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about getting back into music the way I used to do.
Yeah.
Working on a book, and I'm working on 2 films. One is a feature film, one is a short film. I have one short film written. I just got to film it. I want to write the other short film soon, and I need to write the feature soon. So
yeah,
and then Media Moses, obviously, as you know, is a big concern for me, because people need to know about this work out there.
Yeah.
People need to know about conservative and faith-based film. They need to know about these new movements happening around the world. They need to connect together and try to make stuff happen.
Yeah.
So that's what we're here to do. We want to get the conversations out there next, I guess. And
yes.
Thanks to you, a lot of this stuff's happening, honey. So thank you for helping.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh.
And you're doing your new podcast now, which is great.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. The episode we did, I really liked how it went.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just tell everyone where they can find me.
Yeah, go ahead. You're right. It is about that time.
You can find me at Rebecca Loves Jesus on YouTube and Facebook, and Jesus Loves Rebecca on Instagram. And the podcast episode, you can listen to that on YouTube, and I think also here on my space, or on my Twitter account. It's here.
And you're on Instagram too, right?
Yes, on Instagram, Jesus Loves Rebecca.
And I am here on X, Culture Warfare with Jon Croft, or at John Edward Croft. And I'm also at Media Moses. And you can go to MediaMoses.com and see my work there. And you can also go to culturewarfare.locals.com to see some of the new culture war stuff we've got. A lot of these shows are going to end up on there that we do on Spaces. They're going to end up on Locals as well, and hopefully on YouTube as well. So we're growing and growing small, but that's okay.
The Bible says, "Do not despise small beginnings."
Yes, exactly. Thank you for laying down the scripture. That's right. Well, love you guys, and thanks so much for tuning in. And stand up for the culture.
Bless you. Good night.
Good night.